So, with the seasonal patch coming up on January 26, Arenanet announced a whole bunch of things, but most importantly to me, they announced an overhaul to the way that the Shatterer encounter will work. This has me ridiculously hyped, far more than anything else, because the Shatterer, to me, is where it all began. The Shatterer was the first example of a world boss in Guild Wars 2, the first example of a large dynamic event scaling with large numbers of players, some of the first things that Arenanet ever designed and ever put in the game. And for 3 years, it has been a big pile of stacking crap.
Feel the burn!
And so now they're fixing it. Based on their previous work with a Tequatl overhaul, I am thoroughly interested in how this ends up paying off, and I've been whirling around about a million ideas of what exactly Arenanet could do. In addition to this, there was a new interview that came out just the other day, so I'd like to talk to you guys about my ideas, my expectations for the Shatterer revamp, and just get excited with you about what exactly could be coming up. So what we're going to be looking at here today, guys, is original dev comments about the Shatterer, things that they originally wanted with the encounter that never ended up coming true, such as, oh, you know, this would actually be a vaguely engaging encounter.
This is a very epic battle that takes a whole number of players to be able to work together to play through and actually defeat it.
We're going to be looking at what they did with other mega bosses for a little bit of reference. I'm talking about Triple Trouble, I'm talking about the Marionette, I'm talking about some of the End of the Living World Season 1 stuff where we fought Scarlet. I'm talking about pretty much every one of the meta events that we see in Heart of Thorns. We're going to be looking at the encounter as it was actually implemented in the game. And lastly, there was a new interview, as I mentioned, from MMORPG, clarifying a few things about the fight that I'd like to throw out straight away so that we know exactly what's going on. So here's the super obvious stuff. Let's jump in. Number one, the caging mechanic that is currently a part of the fight is going to feature more prominently, is going to get redesigned. They actually talked a little bit about their motivations for redesigning the Shatterer, and instead of it being, you know, oh, hey, this was one of our first big encounters, this entire map actually is one of our original ones, and we kind of didn't like where it's been for years. Instead of any of that, they said, oh, we were motivated basically because of the legendary collection system, and the fact that if you spam blinds on the Shatterer, he barely ever hits his attacks, and then that's been screwing some people over. So it sounds like this was a pretty recent project that they began working on a fix for that, and then just expanded, and then it became this really cool thing. Let's hope that doesn't mean it's going to be too small in scope. I'm going to push that idea to the side a little, just so that we can all be kind of excited about something good coming, right? So, yeah, that caging mechanic where he turns us into crystals, not only is this related to other systems in the game, but actually, I would argue it's one of the things that gives this world boss its flavor over other large world bosses and big designs. Outside of, you know, the visual spectacle of the fight, which has always been awesome, the mechanics, where do they really separate from other encounters? And I think really it's this idea that players can be caged like this and they have to be freed by others. So that's going to feature a bit more prominently, and specifically through break bars. So the devs did announce this. Obviously, with Heart of Thorns, they introduced the break bar system, and if you guys have been watching the channel, I actually do feel this worked very well and has helped in the open world, in our general experience, at least for expansion areas, to be more incentivized to bring CCs, right? To use more of our crowd control abilities, where in the past it was all about the DPS, right? And they've announced that this is definitely going to be a part of the Shatterer. Of course, there are actually a lot of different types of break bars, right? There's the very long, slow, attritive ones that you eventually break down, and then there's like the bursty ones as well, where you want to slam it down very quickly to interrupt a key skill. And it sounds like at the very least, we'll be using break bars to destroy the crystals, i.e. lots of CCs rather than just raw damage to free our friends, perhaps. And there'll be one of these like more bursty break bars to interrupt some of the Shatterer's big attacks, potentially big nukes across the entire group, but we'll see about that. They have explained as well that there are going to be new types of minions associated with this encounter. There are actually some pretty cool mobs that already spawn with the Shatterer. It's just there's this little thing called power creep and over leveling, because the scaling system, you know, isn't finite, isn't perfect. You can still be very powerful. That kind of trivializes them all, and we just ignore them. Some of them look like badass little mini Shatterers. They say that the new minions, there are actually going to be 4 different varieties of new branded entirely, and they'll have all special abilities that synergize not just with each other, but with the Shatterer too. So kind of the example is one of them might CC you, and then that means you're going to get hit by one of the Shatterer's attacks. In fact, from the way they talk in the interview, it seems like this is going to be kind of Tequatl Wave style here, or maybe even a little bit like Veil Guardian from the raids, where it's very positioning based, and a lot of this is actually going to be about avoiding the Shatterer's attacks. See, I think Arenanet looked at the original design of the Shatterer, and the main way that we have trivialized it over 3 years is by standing in safe zones. Not just the blind span, but you stand on that stupid hill, stacked together, we all know about it, you auto-attack and you score the kill. So they've explicitly said, you know, this safe zone is not going to exist anymore, and I think they'll probably try and swing it in the other direction. And now it's like this crazy thing about finding some kind of safe ground close to him so that you can actually continue doing damage. And these lieutenants, these extra branded mobs that they're talking about, are going to hamper your progress that in some way. So therefore, CCs, as they've outright said to us, are going to be far more important, as well as Condi Cleanse. And don't forget, Condi Cleanse can cleanse, you know, chills and cripples and immobes and stuff off of you, which may also be super important to make sure that, again, you can continue avoiding this badass dragon's attacks. So that stuff's all pretty obvious. The Shatterer does also have another mechanic where he spawns a bunch of crystals and he becomes invulnerable, and this is going to be expanded and made more of a prominent part of the encounter where he gets healed up more. So, you know, this is pretty standard fare. This is, let's look at what he's currently got, and they're just expanding on it, making them bigger parts of the actual fight. That's all fine, but what about the new stuff? At the very least confirmed is gliding. So we actually speculated a little bit about this. This is the same patch that brings gliding to Corteria. They've married the two. Who doesn't want to glide and fight a big badass dragon? And they are incorporating that. So along the lines of Siege that we also see are a part of the encounter, currently ignored, we'll talk about in a second. They're going to drop some jump pads down. I think it was pretty obvious they were going to do it with jump pads even before I read this interview. And that allows you to fly up into the sky and actually bomb the Shatterer. Very similar to how we defeat the Vine of Morgemoth at the end of Heart of Thorns, and how we actually deal with one of the Octovines in the Auric Basin. Not only that, they also say, though, and this is the important bit, this is the cooler bit, that stealth gliding is a part of that mechanic. So in Heart of Thorns, they give us stealth gliding, but did you guys notice that really it's basically stupid and pointless and it's never used? Yeah, so they talk in this about how there are these giant static clouds of electricity and stuff. After all, you are flying around in the brand, and you can use stealth gliding to somehow avoid taking damage there while you're up there. Not only can you bomb the Shatterer from on high, but you can also throw medkits to people in the Zerg. So that's pretty nice. And the idea of healing your allies, I think, could have more in this encounter than they're currently letting on. So that's pretty much it. They say that there could be another achievement, probably after the change. They're going to give you an achievement for trying to stand on the old stack spot. Think very much like Jormag, right? The Claw of Jormag, where if you stand at the right place, he can fall on you in the encounter and you get this cheesy little achievement. But aside from that, hopefully we're going to see a lot more positional play be involved. Now, I think another very obvious thing that's going to remain a part of this battle is the Enrage timer. That means that if you don't kill the Shatterer in a certain amount of time, he will leave. These have actually been employed in all the world bosses for a long time, and no, it's not to force artificial difficulty or whatever your stance is on that, but specifically because with the way they do world bosses now, where they all have to work on a set schedule, they like to have world bosses despawn absolutely guaranteed after a certain amount of time, so the maps are clean and that they know that the next time it comes around, that world boss can comfortably spawn again. So I do think we're obviously going to see another Enrage timer, but does that mean that he's going to be very difficult? Actually, the answer is no. So this is the most important thing from this interview. And that is that when asked how difficult this would be, or specifically how quickly till people get it on farm, they kind of expressed the opinion that it would be balanced for the map's level. Which is a really weird idea, because, come on, Arenanet, 90% of your player base are going to be level 80 when doing this Shattering encounter, but fine. So they're balancing it for that rough area, and I do actually think it's probably smart. With the very, very difficult world bosses, as much as I've personally enjoyed them, a lot of frustrations come with those, and they will find a lot of people don't even try the content because it's too hard after like their first or second attempt. This also does leave them a little bit of leeway, maybe in the future, to add like a hard mode version of it or something, but it seems like the difficulty, in my opinion, is going to be balanced somewhere around the current Chuck Gerrant. As in, you can actually do it, but it's a complicated, involved, interesting encounter, and that is fine with me. It doesn't have to be some ridiculously risky, oh god, are we even going to make it situation every time you fight the boss, but there should be enough to make it engaging, to make it something fun instead of just an auto-attack fest. So, that's what we know. Now I want to talk about some other stuff. I want to talk a little bit specifically about a video I did a few months ago about the Shatterer. And it's kind of weird, don't you think, that I did a video about the Shatterer just a couple of months ago when this is when we've had the news about this boss's existence? Why would I have done that? Well, the reason I did a video a couple of months ago was because of a tool called Tyria 3D, where I was data mining some old unseen maps that the devs had created. And so that's what you can see on screen right now. I did decide to jump back in. What we discovered around half a year ago was that at some point, Arenanet had been looking into remaking the Shatterer encounter before this. So even though in that interview they say their motivations were, you know, maybe sparked by this blind and the legendary collections, they've clearly had it on their radar for a lot longer than that. And even though this map you guys are currently seeing never made it into the game, they may draw inspiration from it. I'm not going to do a huge look at it. That's really not what I want this entire video to focus on. You guys can check in the description the old one I did. But there are a few things to point out here specifically that we may end up seeing in the Shatterer event. Number one is the existence of Steel Eye Span. Now, what this was, in actuality, was after Arenanet overhauled, say, Tequatl and the Triple Trouble Worm, they were getting criticism for throwing these in the open world. This was probably before the idea of raiding was fully nailed down for them for their difficult content. And what it actually looks like they were doing, where they were trying to play with an instance version of the world boss that existed on a map that actually doesn't exist in the open world. Steel Eye Span in actual Tyria is not this close to where the Shatterer spawns. This ledge that the Shatterer is currently stood on doesn't actually exist in open world Tyria, so I'm not sure how likely it is we'll see the ledge, for example, or these exact areas of terrain. Another really interesting thing that could be a clue as to something on this encounter was this area of the map over here, where they seem to have some weird stuff and a long path that goes far away. Now, we speculated before, and I still maintain the speculation, that this was probably something to do with the Shatterer flying in and then the Shatterer flying out. Those who very much like the Shatterer encounter, you guys should remember that he has kind of this very specific death animation where he flies away, goes up into the sky, and then he explodes into 100 shards. And maybe this was some kind of play on that. Maybe we'll see that's expanded upon in somehow with the eventual encounter. So yeah, this was an interesting map. It does mean that Arenanet may have more plans in store. They will have looked at their old designs here and maybe drawn something from it. But what exactly? Who knows? So, in addition to the interview, Arenanet did also put their own post out about the content we're going to experience with the Shatterer fight, and really they don't say too much more than what I've already expressed in this video. You could take that to mean that this is a very small scope update, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised by that. I wouldn't be surprised to see this is actually smaller with everything else than perhaps even the Tequatl fight was. But to entertain the idea that something else could be going on, I think you can actually draw some interesting conclusions, and I want to hone in on something that the Shatterer does that the devs can play a lot into, and that is how much he moves. And you might be thinking, well, what, Wooden Potatoes, what are you talking about? The Shatterer just stands in a single spot. Yes, he has like one animation where he flies into the sky for a little while and then he lands again, but this is a classic example of a boss where we just hack away at the shins. Wrong, I say to you, however. The Shatterer doesn't only exist in the fight. A lot of the exposure most players get to the Shatterer isn't just from this boss fight, but it comes from the fact that throughout this entire map, you can see the Shatterer flying around the brand high in the sky, even landing in several different places, perching on different rocks. Specifically, if you want to see this easily, a lot of the time his animations bug out when you do certain personal story steps. You can even see as many as like 4 or 5 Shatterers moving all at once, which is quite funny. But this guy moves a lot, and they actually have the capability of having landing in several different places. Why do I think this is important? Well, I think it's important because of something else in the way that they've been designing these large boss fights ever since Tequatl. And that is, they have been splitting the zergs up. So Tequatl was designed with one thing in mind. 150 players or 100 plus players, tons of people, all on that one beachhead with an epic battle against a dragon. And that's a cool idea. And to an extent, the players were encouraged to spread out a little. You know, you had some people back on the turrets, and then you had other groups of people defending said turrets. But people were mostly contained to one area. And this meant that many people were experiencing skill lag and client-side FPS drops, major ones. This meant that most people, to this day, I still have to cull my player population levels down and adjust graphic settings just because of the fear that I would crash out. Now, because of the 64-bit client, that may be less of an issue, but that's not to say every single player is on the 64-bit client. But after that, Arenanet assessed it, and what have they done ever since? they've encouraged people to split up, and that's exactly to avoid this issue. The Marionette had us splitting over, what, like 5 different groups with an alternated rotating group fighting specifically the Marionette itself. Triple Trouble Worms split the entire map's population into 3 hugely remote, distinct areas of the map. Every single Heart of Thorns meta event that has come out has us split up. Verdant Brink has us split into 5 different areas. The Auric Basin has us fairly central, but again, large walls that block off our visibility from any other Zerg, and we are fighting in 4 different locations, never to come together in the center of the event, as cool as that may have sounded. Dragon Stand 2, while it's one long progression through a map, what did they have us do? They had us split 3 ways, and then even split more when lots of events procced throughout our specific escort that we're doing at the time. So, what are they going to do with the Shatterer? This is a really interesting question. Are they going to have us all move together again, stacking in one general area in that one battlefield? Are they going to do that specifically as well when they know they can move the Shatterer wherever the hell they like in the brand? Are they going to do that when, according to previous designs and things they were playing around with, when they had this in an instance, they were at least looking at Steel Eye Span? Well, in all likelihood, probably yes. I have a feeling that if the Shatterer fight was going to take place in lots of different places, then they would have talked about that, or at least, you know, more than just this one location. But Steel Eye Span would be so cool, guys. So the premise would be that at certain phases, at certain transitions, he would take off, he'd use all the existing animations they have, he'd fly away, he'd land in a different area of the map, maybe here, maybe elsewhere. There would be more than one battlefield at this place. This would give that Zerg split, that would preserve people's frame rates, that would keep those problems away. And players would have to, you know, defend these locations. They'd have to make sure their siege has been built up. They'd have to preserve it, wait for the Shatterer to land, do the damage as best they can for that moment, and then when he leaves, they keep the, you know, ground zero nice and safe for themselves. What you guys have to consider is this map is Arenanet's baby. This is one of the first maps they ever made outside of Queensdale. This map has incredible amounts of polish and very little incentive for players to see what's going on. Steel Eye Span's a great example. Steel Eye Span has a lot of different events associated with it, and the level of polish you see on those events is unlike anything else you're likely to see in Guild Wars 2. Right, so for example, there are some events where you have to defend the span from branded who are attacking it. Fairly standard idea for an event, but they've got these side hallways with weapons that you can pick up, flamethrowers to incinerate any branded devourers that manage to burrow their way inside. The branded will actually blow open holes on the sides of the pipes, which the Char then tried to repair. Now, yes, wood and potatoes, that's fairly standard, you might say, but what you might not realize is there are several different stages of rebuilding animation on these just tiny random bits of pipe. Arenanet put a lot of work into these areas, into events that players really will not have seen much of before. The entire area of Steel Eye Span is actually a meta event. It's one of several meta events in the game that basically have no conclusion or no tie into anything else. There's a well set up huge field next to Steel Eye Span with nothing but random branded wandering around picking daisies, perfectly in sight of a large array of siege weaponry that you can blow them up with. There's just no point to do it. An arrangement of siege not unlike the arrangement of siege we see at the current place that we fight the Shatterer. Man, it would be such a good thing. So I will be chuffed if Arenanet end up going with this angle, if this does end up a component of the fight. I wanted to bring it to your guys' attention at the very least, even though I do remain fairly skeptical. I think it would have at least leaked into maybe the interview or something if we were going to have a pretty big shift like this where we get to move it around. For what it's worth, Steel Eye Span is not the only place. There's actually a fairly underused area of the brand in the south, unless guild missions kind of confuse things, as well as the temple as well on the brand too. But moving on from that idea, let's talk a little bit more about splitting up. It is, of course, possible to make people spread out a bit, even though you're in a fairly localized area. And even though Tequata was very bad and a good example of low FPS and lag and bad design, they did do some stuff right. And I'd say certainly that's when it comes to the turrets. Turrets which also exist with the Shatterer. You do have this basic idea of boss, players who try to damage the boss, turrets who assist the players who try to damage the boss, players who defend the players on the turrets who are defending the players who are damaging the boss, right? You got kind of those multiple levels. Tequado's a great example of that. I think that they will have learned some stuff from Tequado about the way that their defense events scale and how many players they actually want to be focused on the turrets and so on. And Tequato, for what it's worth, did in its original design before it got overhauled have turrets a part of its mechanics, but they weren't really very interesting. The Shatterer fight already has more interesting stuff going on. There are two types. You've got mortars. Mortars will either do flat damage or you can fire like healing bombs. And it's even got like big cannons as well, which presumably should do more damage, but they're rarer. Less players can actually get into them. The funny thing is about these Siege right now is they're clunky as hell. Often when you use abilities on them, they can kick you out. They use the trebuchet mechanic, so it's very easy to miss. The healing, obviously, is completely useless. So I think these things are obviously going to get overhauled. The interview says as much. And very importantly, I think we'll actually see the healing component of those mortars be expanded upon. Because think about this patch, guys. Think about what else is coming in the January 26th patch. Gliding? Is that a part of the Shatterer encounter? You're damn right it is. What else? Randomly, it would seem, despite the community's request for it a long time, a change to the way that dynamic events reward you for applying boons and healing. And what do we have being overhauled? An encounter against a dragon where there are mortars that are specifically used for healing zergs. I actually think this change could have been motivated by a new Shatterer encounter where people on mortars are healing large groups of players in front of them, protecting them against, damage over time or any of those kinds of things. I actually think we'll see that be expanded on in a big way, and that is why they may have also, with the same patch, changed the way that we're rewarded for dynamic events, so the people on those mortars, always get gold for the actual event. In addition to all this stuff, I also had a look back at the old 2010 Gamescom demos. It's always fun to see what the devs were saying back then. You guys should see some of the footage in the background. I actually managed to find an unlisted video on a YouTube channel that was basically showing some of this stuff that is very, very difficult to find now. There's some crazy OP warrior stuff going on. But in the background, a couple of things that I could discern that's kind of interesting. And that is, first of all, the idea originally, with the original design of the Shatterer, that he wouldn't even spawn unless players did specific things and pushed the map in a good way. Obviously, that isn't going to be a part of the design here. This is a world boss. It will spawn like clockwork in a specific place at a specific time, regardless of what we do. But I do like this idea that the devs used to go on about with those pre-events, that you had to support the vigil in the area and the chart in the area to build up enough siege and stake the odds in your favor. And what I'm thinking might happen with the Shatterer revamp is these events won't be pre-events so much, or this idea won't so much be pre-events, but actually could be continuously going on during the fight. So the idea of escorting supply lines and bringing siege and ammunition and so forth to the battlefield from elsewhere on the map during the actual Shatterer battle. That could be a very interesting way of splitting the groups up, of making sure that you've got this kind of war effort style thing going on, and could perhaps be something we see, because they're probably going to push the envelope a little here, and we haven't seen something like that, not in any of the Heart of Thorns maps or any of their other big things. Again, I cannot stress the fact that this probably isn't going to be ridiculously difficult, but that doesn't mean the complexities in the design aren't going to be a massive improvement for us. The depth that we'll see here, the amount of different achievements that we can go for. And for all those reasons, I'm very excited. Hopefully they hit somewhere around these expectations. Hopefully they do something cool. I will point out to you guys, just an interesting note, there is no level 80 branded zone whatsoever. So this is really our only chance to get some great branded end game, dare I say, content, right? He's the only world boss that really exists in the brand as well at that. So let's hope they do something good. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Do you think I'm crazy for thinking that the fight's going to go so far away from where it currently is and we'll have these different phases? I hope not. But yeah, I wanted to share with you guys my thoughts, a bit of theory craft that I was doing in my brain. Don't forget about the link in the description to the other video where I really dived into this Tyria 3D map, which I guess will never exist now that they're doing this regular open world overhaul. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. There is a second video on the channel today. It's about 5 minutes long, but if you feel the need for more Guild Wars 2 from me, and you haven't really been noticing, I've actually set up some cool stuff on YouTube this past week that has put out a lot more content. I'm talking hours and hours and hours of me playing Guild Wars 2 and chatting about cool stuff to do with the game. So check that out if you guys like. Thanks very much for watching. Let me know what you think, and I guess I'll see you next time. January 26th cannot come quick enough.